Yes, the market expectation is there'll be something extraordinary because for several reasons. First is that the BJP ran a campaign looking for development, looking for structural reforms, etc. So, as you said, the first one was more interim. It had to be done within about 40 days of coming to power. Here market expects big things, and I also expect big things. The second is political prudence demands that in case you want to do something whose effect will be felt over a few years, it's better to do it in the earliest opportunity. Because going towards the next elections, you will have to be populist. Right. So the first two budgets of any government, even the Narasimha Rao government in the 90s, are epoch-making. So we expect some significant reform measures in this budget. And third is also the fact that BJP has a very strong majority in the Lok Sabha, and is able to push through any number. Remember, the budget is passed only by the Lok Sabha. It's a money bill. So all these together, expectations are admittedly pretty high. Well, the market always wants some goodies, I'm yet to see an investor who doesn't, who likes paying tax. So from that point of view, but to be objective about it, the tax revenue collections have been a problem for the government. Added to that, the tax regime for capital markets in India is one of the most favorable in the world. We have a long-term capital gain which is free after 1 year. We have a short-term capital gain which is 15%. And dividends are tax-free. If you look at these three things, there's a very compelling potpourri for any investor. So given that, I don't think there's going to be any dramatic relaxation. STT is also a goose that lays the golden eggs for the government. And there is very high level of speculation and turnover in the market, and the finance minister could be forgiven if he doesn't reduce that. So there is one thing though, I don't know the government will take heed of this, because in the last budget they increased the short-term capital gains on debt mutual funds to 30%, and they increased the period for long-term to 3 years. That's hit a lot of pensioners and people hard. And so there has been a lot of representations to the government that the status quo should be restored on taxation of debt instruments. So we may expect something on that score.
Right.
The market's looking forward to definitive statements on doing business in India easier. Some very strong relaxations in land acquisition, which has just come through as an ordinance, in labor regulations, in ease of tax administration, apart from the headline percentages. So these are things India still ranks very, very low in ease of doing business, for whatever that Modi has been saying. So some tangible steps market players would expect. A lot of clamor for that, and considering that the Delhi elections have not gone very well for the BJP, there would be some pressure from the party to give some goodies to the middle class, which seems to have been alienated, at least in Delhi. And last time the tax rates were, the exemption limit was increased a very small amount. It's sort of almost like a cosmetic effect. And so what Jaitley may do is, I believe, he might, even if I expect him to increase the minimum slab surely. And I also expect that the exemption limit is very, very low. And people have been talking about the savings rate coming down pretty dramatically. To some extent, that's because of the consumption. People are turning more consumption-driven lifestyle changes and so forth. But even then, India's very strong point had been a very high savings rate, nearly 35% or so. So you might get a very impressive jump in the ATC benefits and some direct benefit for new issues, because even though we have a bull market, the new issues have not really come out. So to induce people to come and invest in new shares so that the SMEs can benefit extra. So there might be something. The corporate sector, like Oliver, always asks for more. They have a big wish list and they present it better through their FICCIs and CIIs. But then there is again a perception that the corporate sector has got a lot of goodies and they should be kept under check. One genuine demand of theirs is MAT. MAT is also being imposed on export processing zones and exports. I mean, so it's crazy. You cannot have an export-free zone and you promise all sorts of incentives and then you bring in MAT. So there's a lot of discussion going on between the government and industry representatives about making some favorable changes in MAT. So I think that might come about, and some more investment incentives to increase the investment rate. So these are some legitimate expectations of the corporate sector, but I don't think the headline rates will be changed. That's a very good question. I think the Indian stock market last several years, in fact, have danced to the FII tunes. When they are selling, the market crashes when they're going down. So it's a fact we have to live with. So the FIIs are slightly different in their approach. They buy markets, they don't buy stocks, in the sense that they change their exposure to countries depending on what they feel the investment environment is. What they would be looking at is more the macro. First thing I'm sure FIIs would look at is the fiscal deficit number. Because what happens is when the government gets profligate and spends more money and prints cash to finance it, there's inflation and there's more government borrowing. When there's more government borrowing, that increases interest rates, which is bad for the corporate sector. So I think the first key thing FIIs will look for is that magical number, whether A, the government will keep it at 4.1%, and B, whether they'll be on course to bring it down to 3.6% of the GDP, as was stated by the earlier finance minister in his budget plans. So they'll be looking at that. The second thing they'll be looking at is investments to GDP ratio. The economy is in a very low growth cycle and manufacturing has been the worst affected, and the investment to GDP ratio is at an all-time low, like the savings rate. So they look for some big bang announcements of public spending in the railway budget, for example, which will be a precursor to the general budget, and then in the regular budget itself they expect something quite audacious from the finance minister. And the third they would expect is the GST, because the GST, VAT had a very good effect on black money control, and GST, because of the flow-through nature, a single tax which consumes state and central level taxes, would be a huge positive, and the FIIs understand that more than Indian investors. And the fourth, I think they would look, at least some of them, will look for some sort of opening up of the debt markets a bit more, because they want to invest in India. The Indian debt markets have given huge returns, but the Indian government is reluctant to permit them beyond a point. So they look for substantial opening up of the debt market. And last but not the least, some baby steps towards convertibility. India has $320 billion plus of reserves, and our inflation is low. Our currency has been one of the strongest in the world. So this is a tremendous environment for the Modi government to take their rupee substantially convertible. That'll be a huge big bang thing, for FIIs, because then their money becomes absolutely fungible with the dollar, etc. At least some positive statement that it's on the government's radar. So they will have a pretty big wish list, because their expectations after the way Modi has gone around world capitals sort of marketing India is very high indeed.
anything?
Well, what happens in the budget is the market, if you look at the market dynamics, and I've been in this market for more than 40 years now, market keeps on building expectations. And it has a certain expectation. There might be 8 fantastic things, but if the market looking for 15 fantastic things, it'll fall. So right now, the market's looking, I think, for a pretty reform-oriented budget, an investment-oriented budget. Frankly, the market's not expecting anything great on the taxation front, but investment-oriented budget, reform-oriented budget, and some removal of draconian laws like the retrospective tax and all that, where government also lost the Vodafone case. If any of these things don't happen, markets will crash. Because they say, oh, Modi talks a lot, but there's nothing really different from him, from the previous government. So he's not following up the talk with the walk. So expectation levels are high, and these are the areas where the market's almost expecting or discounting these types of things. So if Jaitley on 28th doesn't deliver, then boy oh boy, we'll be in for a shock.